Greetings. Welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change. That's abrupt climate change. For those of you playing at home, that's where the Earth heats up really, really fast, or things spin way out of control within the space of a couple of years, wiping out whole species. Wiping out the ability for humans to grow food for 7 billion humans, and then really bad things follow. That's what abrupt climate change is about. We could very well be on the brink of that, and unfortunately, that's not, something I'm happy to report. Not something I'm overjoyed about knowing or passing on as information, but pass on I must, because this is where we're at. To exist in any other kind of falsehood or reality that does not take climate change into account is just that. It's a falsehood, and it's a fantasy, really, at the end of the day. If you do not operate in reality, that might be known as psychosis or psychotic, or somebody who is having a break with reality is called a psychotic. On many levels, our entire culture is psychotic. We are all addicts, and we are all narcissists, believing that we have the right and are entitled to do whatever it is we want to do on the planet. We just get to do whatever we want. We have free will. We're gifted by God with free will and the ability to just run around and chop everything down on the earth. That's a big reason why this is happening. That humans are above the very thing or things that sustain them. That humans are so powerful that we can recreate our living situations and not have any repercussions, or we could completely obliterate our living situation and not have any repercussions because we're so god dang smart. This is mass psychosis. This is some kind of wild brainwashing that we've done. We've done it to ourselves. We teach our kids from a very early age, this is how you live. This is what we do. This is what you're supposed to do. And as adults, if somebody does something outside of our paradigm or outside of our culture, we're like, you're insane. What are you doing? How dare you do that? Oh my God, how can you do that? Oh my God, you don't have a brand new car? You don't have a 2-year-old car? Oh my God, what's wrong with you? Oh my God, you don't have money to feed your kids? What's wrong with you? Oh my God, you don't have somewhere to live? What's wrong with you? Oh my God, you're not living in a huge McMansion? What's wrong with you? Oh my God, you don't have money to just fly anywhere you want to in the world on a moment's notice? What's wrong with you? The question, obviously, the questions are all wrong. The questions that we should be asking are all wrong. We should be asking, what in God's name are we doing to this planet? Why are we doing it? Why do we need to do all these things? These and many more existential questions we try to ruminate on. Sometimes we have answers, sometimes they're just questions. I'm just going to run through a bunch of articles tonight because there's just so much in my inbox, and I got to get it out. I got to just kind of go through these and see how much I can talk about. in the next 20 or so minutes. I'm going to start with this one. This is from Unicorn Riot. And what is the date on this? February 4th, 2019. Valve turners shut down Enbridge oil pipelines in Minnesota. Itasca County, Minnesota, today, 4 people calling themselves the 4 necessity valve turners shut down Enbridge's Line 3 and Line 4 tar sands oil pipelines in Minnesota, citing imminent and irreversible damage being done to the planet. The activists entered pipeline service locations and advised Enbridge of their intention to stop the flow of oil by shutting down the safety valves. Enbridge eventually manually shut down both the Line 3 and Line 4 tar sands pipelines. The 4 necessity valve turners, Allison Pullman, Brenna Cusson Anglada, Michelle Nair Obed, and Daniel Yildirim, documented their action in a live feed filled with prayer, song, and an encounter with law enforcement, with one officer who came on them with their gun drawn. The 4 identified themselves as Catholic workers and farmers and said they wanted to defend life against the fossil fuel industry that benefits the few in the expense of all life. And that's that. Update as of 3:22 a.m. Central Daylight Time. Is it daylight time? It's actually standard time right now. Or is it daylight time? No, it is daylight time. Sorry, guys. As of 3:22 a.m. Central Daylight Time on February 5th, 2019, Facebook has removed the page that the live streams of the action were broadcast from. So take that. Take that, guys, because we can't have your actions broadcast on social media giving anybody any ideas. This is the freedom that we all fight for. This is awesome. I approve of this action. I think it's cool. Excuse me. I think I was talking about the Dakota Access Pipeline protest the other day, which I also thought were really important actions taken to resist the fossil fuel industry and the pipelines. Here's another action that really should be taken, because even though these things are great to do, if you took away the demand, you cripple the oil industry way harder than that. If you just go up against some cops and go, hey, destroy stuff, yeah, that's one thing you can do. But if you convinced, a couple 100,000 people not to buy gas for a week, then you'd see people being really pissed. Then you'd see the oil companies being really mad, because think about that loss of profits. If you had 1 million people or 2 million people willing to do that for a whole week, then we're talking serious damage. If you had 1 billion people willing to do that for a week, we're talking about no more fossil fuel industry, dead, gone, done. So if you want to know how to really take down the fossil fuel industry, figure out a way to stop using fossil fuels, and then convince your friends to do the same, and then have them convince their friends to do the same. And it's like a Pearl commercial. It's just good times. But I approve of all of the above, all and sundry. Moving on to crappy news. Trump administration begins production of a new nuclear weapon. Crappy. This whole channel is crappy news. I should rename the channel Bear Crap News, or Crappy Bear News, or Big Crap News. I don't know. Yeah. Trump administration begins production of a new nuclear weapon. January 28th, 2019. Excuse me. The U.S. Department of Energy has started making a new low-yield nuclear weapon designed to counter Russia. The National Nuclear Security Administration says production of the weapon, known as the W762, has begun the W762, has begun in its Pantex plant in the Texas Panhandle. Say that 3 times fast. Pantex plant in the Pantex plant in the Texas Panhandle. I can't do it. The fact that the weapon was under production was first shared in an email to the Exchange Monitor, an industry trade magazine, and independently confirmed by NPR. The weapon is a variant of the Navy's primary submarine-launched nuclear weapon, the W-76-1. That warhead is a strategic weapon, quote unquote, meaning it makes a very big boom. The hell? Is that a real sentence in this article? It makes a very big boom. The W761 is believed to have a yield of around 100 kilotons. That's just stupid. Whatever. According to Hans Christensen, director of the Nuclear Information Project at the Federation of American Scientists, an Army Control Advocacy group. By contrast, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima had a yield of about 15 kilotons. So, talking about 6 times the size, roughly, or 7. So the W762 the details would not be provided, but it's believed to have a yield of around 5 to 7 kilotons. The smaller yield is probably created by removing or disabling the secondary stage of the W761. The secondary is designed to deliver a large thermonuclear blast triggered by a much smaller nuclear weapon known as the primary. Removing or disabling the secondary while leaving the primary would, in effect, create a smaller weapon. Well, isn't that smart? Those guys are brilliant. Whoever thought that up. New, smaller warheads will help balance Russian forces, the report claims. It will raise the nuclear threshold and help ensure the potential adversaries perceive no possible advantage in limited nuclear escalation, making nuclear employment less likely. Actually, the reverse is true, because you have little 5 kiloton bombs. They're like, you know what? We could just do this little one. Here we go. Catch. Yeah, that's what that means. Just reverse that, and then that will be true. So yeah, that's the new plan, is to make smaller weapons to make people feel better about actually using them. Moving on. So I heard that Russia had developed. So here's a report about Russia developing a new weapon, not nuclear, but anyways. The Russian Navy reportedly has a new weapon that can disrupt the eyesights of targets as well as make them hallucinate and vomit. Russian state news agency RIA Novosti reported that a Russian military contractor has installed the weapon on 2 Russian warships. The weapon fires a beam similar to a strobe light that affects the target's eyesight, making it more difficult for them to aim at night. During testing, volunteers reportedly used rifles and guns to shoot targets that were protected by the weapon. The volunteers reported having trouble aiming because they couldn't see. Additionally, about half of the volunteers said they felt dizzy, nauseous, and disoriented. About 20% of the volunteers reported experiencing hallucinations. The weapon, called the Filin, has reportedly been installed on the Admiral Gorshkov and Admiral Kasatonov, 2 Russian warships. The weapon is expected to be installed on more ships that are currently being built. Great news. That's wonderful. Let me see if I heard something else. Let me see if I can find it. Oh my God. So yeah, just found it. Here's another crappy story about Russia conducts a new test of its nuclear-powered cruise missile. So we have a nuclear missile powered by nuclear power. So great. I'm assuming the cruise missile is a nuclear missile, but maybe not. Maybe it's just a nuclear-powered missile, which makes a lot of sense, right? A missile running on nuclear energy could run for days, flying around the globe if necessary. Russian madness. The Russia's nuclear-powered cruise missiles, a throwback to crazy-sounding Cold War weapons tech, is back. Whether it'll ever work is a separate issue. The Burevestnik Storm Petrel It's designed to evade U.S. defenses, flying for hours or even days to exploit holes in missile defense networks that most weapons can't reach. Russia hasn't tested the weapon in nearly a year, until last week, that is. According to the Diplomat, the test took place on January 29 at Kapustin Yar, one of Russia's major weapon testing grounds. The website quoted anonymous sources in the U.S. government with knowledge of the weapons program. The missile is known to the U.S. intelligence community as the KY-30, or the SSC X-9 Skyfall. In November 2017, a moderately successful test of Skyfall from the Pankovo test site on the Arctic island of Novaya Zemlya resulted in several Russian ships fishing debris, nuclear materials from the Barents Sea. The Diplomat sources described the most recent test as partially successful. Russian President Vladimir Putin officially announced this weapon's existence back in March 2018. Y'all remember that, I think. Putin stated, the launch and the set of ground tests allow Russia to get to creating a radically new type of weaponry, strategic nuclear weaponry complex with a missile fitted with a nuclear-powered engine, he said with glee. Putin further described the missile, later named Burevestnik, via a poll of the Russian public, as having unlimited range and unlimited ability to maneuver. This technology has a long history. In the early 1960s, the United States attempted to build a similar nuclear-powered missile known as Project Pluto. The program was working toward a weapon system named the Supersonic Low Altitude Missile, SLAM was its acronym, was supposed to fly at Mach 3.5 at low altitude and eject a payload of H-bombs over enemy targets over the course of a long flight. Ooh-wee. But Project Pluto was killed off, doomed by the advent of intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and the fact that there was no way to practically test it without spewing radiation everywhere. Oh, I'm laughing because it's so ridiculous. I mean, that's good. They didn't test it, I guess, or maybe we don't know. And so is the Russian weapons spewing radiation everywhere? Is that what's happening? Russia's missile may not fly at Mach 3.5 or carry racks of H-bombs, but it would have one of the major advantages that inspired Project Pluto: unheard of range for a powered flying object. Modern cruise missiles use turbojet or turbofan engines and typically have ranges of 1,000 miles or so, a limit that is dictated by the fuel supply. A nuclear-powered cruise missile could fly for much longer, perhaps staying aloft for days. If Burevestnik becomes operational, and that's a big if, given the complexity and danger of nuclear-powered engines and the insanity of testing them, Russia could launch cruise missiles from the Asian mainland, program them to cross the Pacific, then go around South America and penetrate U.S. airspace from the Gulf of Mexico. Super long, previously impossible flight paths would become a reality. This would force the U.S. to fund a number of expensive upgrades to its air defense network, which has always assumed an air attack would come from the north, west, or east, but never from the south. Never from the south. Yeah, well, awesome. Great news. Maniacs are still in control. Everybody rejoice. Moving on to something from the Guardian from February 4th. Tasmania is burning. The climate disaster future has arrived while those in power laugh at us. Scott Morrison is trying to scare people about economic policy, but seems blithely unaware people are already scared about climate change. Support our anyways, as I write this, fire is 500 meters from the largest King Billy pine forest in the world on Mount Bobs, an ancient forest that dates back to the last ice age and has trees over 1,000 years old. Fire has broached the boundaries of Mount Field National Park with its glorious alpine vegetation, unlike anything on the planet. Fire laps at the edges of Federation Peak, Australia's grandest mountain, and around the base of Mount Anne with its exquisite rainforest and alpine gardens. Fire laps at the border of the walls of Jerusalem National Park with its labyrinthine landscapes of tarns and iconic stands of ancient pencil pine, and its beautiful alpine landscape ecosystems described by their most eminent scholar, the ecologist Professor Jamie Kilpatrick, as like the version of a Japanese garden made more complex and developed in paradise in amongst this Gothic scenery. You have plants that look like rocks, green rocks, and these plants have different colors and complicated mosaics, red, green, blue, green, yellow, green, all together. It's an overwhelming sensual experience, really. 5 years ago, I was contacted by a stranger, Professor Peter Davies, an eminent water scientist. He wanted me to meet because he had news he thought would interest me. The night we met, Davies told me that the southwest of Tasmania, the island's vast uninhabited and globally unique wildland, the heart of its World Heritage Area, was dying. The iconic habitats of rainforest, button grass plains, and heathlands had begun to vanish because of climate change. I was shocked. I had understood that climate change's effect on Tasmania would be significant, but not disastrous. The changes mitigated by Tasmania being surrounded by seas that were not heating as quickly as others. The island's west would get wetter, the east a little warmer and drier, but compared to much of the world, it didn't seem catastrophic. But it wasn't so. Tasmania's seawaters were warming at 2 to 3 times the global rate. Sound familiar? Case in point, the Arctic. Davies' work with that of other scientists was revealing the warming and drying of Tasmania's western highlands and the growing impact this was having. The highland lakes of Tasmania would, for example, in the next 70 to 100 years, see between a 10% and 20% drop in rainfall, coupled with a 20% to 30% increase in evaporation. By the end of the century, a significant proportion of these lakes and wetlands will cease to exist or be largely dried out much of the year. Then there was a startling new phenomenon of widespread dry lightning storms, almost unknown in Tasmania until this century. They had increased exponentially since 2000, leading to a greatly increased rate of fire in rapidly drying southwest. Compounding all this, winds were also growing in duration, further drying the environment and fueling the fire spread and ferocity. Such a future would see these fires destroy Tasmania's globally unique rainforests and mesmerizing alpine heathlands. Unlike mainland eucalyptus forest, these ecosystems do not regenerate after fire. They would vanish forever. Tasmania's World Heritage Area was our Great Barrier Reef, and like the Great Barrier Reef, it seemed doomed by climate. So there's a bunch of wildfires in Tasmania, like a ton. Like I saw a picture. Where did I see it? I think it was on Nick Humphrey's Facebook page. Humphrey, that there were, I don't know, looked like 20 fires or something in Tasmania, like some very large ones and a bunch of small ones. Today, Tasmania is burning. Its fires are so large that a firefighting team was reportedly called out in New Zealand to investigate a heavy smoke haze that turned out to have drifted across 2,500 kilometers of ocean from the Tasmanian fires. Firefighters are confronted with 1,629 kilometers of fire front, with fires having consumed 119,000 hectares, or 3% of Tasmania's land, with authorities warning there is no sign of fires abating for several weeks, and the potential for catastrophic consequences still a distinct possibility. Yeah. So bad things happening in Tasmania. I'm going to link this below and move on. Probably going to do 1 or 2 more articles in this video. See how much I can get in here. This is from The Guardian from February 4th. A third of Himalayan ice cap doomed, finds report. Even radical climate change action won't save glaciers, endangering 2 billion people. At least a third of the huge ice fields in Asia's towering mountain chain are doomed to melt due to climate change, according to a landmark report with serious consequences for almost 2 billion people. Even if carbon emissions are dramatically and rapidly cut and succeed in limiting global warming to a 1.5C, 36% of the glaciers along the Hindu Kush and Himalaya range will have gone by 2100. If emissions are not cut, the loss soars to 2/3. Guess where we're heading? The glaciers are a critical water store for the 250 million people who live in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, and 1.65 billion people rely on the great rivers that flow from their peaks into India, Pakistan, China, and other nations. This is the climate crisis you haven't heard of, said Philippus Wester of the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, or ICMOD, who led the report. In the best of possible worlds, if we get really ambitious in tackling climate change, even then, we will lose 1/3 of the glaciers and be in trouble. That, for us, was the shocking finding. Wester said that despite being far more populous, the HKH region had received less attention than other places such as low-lying island states and the Arctic that are also highly vulnerable to global warming. Professor Gemma Wadham of the University of Bristol said this is a landmark piece of work focused on a region that is a hotspot for climate change impacts. Excuse me. The new report requested by the 8 nations the mountains span is intended to change that. More than 200 scientists worked on that report over 5 years with another 125 experts peer reviewing their work. Until recently, the impact of climate change on the ice in the HKH region was uncertain, said Wester. But we really do know enough now to take action, and action is urgently needed, he added. The HKH region runs from Afghanistan to Myanmar and is the planet's third pole, harboring more ice than anywhere outside Arctic and Antarctica. Limiting the global temperature rise to 1.5C above pre-industrial levels requires cutting emissions to zero by 2050. Actually, even doing that won't limit us to 1.5C. I'm sorry for the bad news about that, guys. But most people watching this video already know that. But if you're new, sorry for the bad news. We're not going to do that. We're going to have to work really, really hard, like bats out of hell with our hairs on fires, to stay below 4. And 4 is total and utter extinction. So that should just be the goal. Like, let's not get to 4. Let's not just go totally and utterly extinct. I mean, obviously we should not warm to 2 or 3, but we're already, we've already got that like locked in, I believe. Most people would believe that that's true. Excuse me. This is felt to be extremely optimistic by many, but still sees 1/3 of the ice lost, according to the report, of course. If the global rise is 2C, half of the glaciers are projected to melt away by 2100. Half. Since the 1970s, about 15% of the ice in the HKH region has disappeared as temperatures have risen. But the HKH range is 3,500 kilometers long, and the impact of warming is variable. Some glaciers in Afghanistan and Pakistan are stable, and a few are even gaining ice, most probably due to increased cloud cover that shields the sun and changed winds that bring more snow. But even these will start melting with future warming, Wester said. The melting glaciers will increase river flows through to 2050 and 2060, he said, pushing up the risk of high-altitude lakes bursting their banks and engulfing communities. But from the 2060s, river flows will go into decline. The Indus and Central Asian rivers will be most affected. Those areas will be hard hit, said Wester. Lower flows will cut the power from the hydro dams, generate much of the region's electricity. But the most serious impact will be on farmers in the foothills and downstream. They rely on predictable water supplies to grow the crops that feed the nations in the mountains' shadows. But the changes to spring melting already appear to be causing the pre-monsoon river flow to fall just when farmers are planting their crops. Worse, said Wester, the monsoon is also becoming more erratic and prone to extreme downpours. 1 in 100-year floods are starting to happen every 50 years, he said. Bullshit. if India, and I know India's had major flooding in the last 2 or 3 years, and it's just like what's been happening in the U.S., which is we have 1 in 100 years floods now almost every year or every other year, or we have 1 in 500 year floods or 1 in 1,000 year, 1 in 100 year floods every 50 years. That's nothing. That's nothing. The new report highlights how vulnerable many mountain people are, with 1/3 living on less than $1.90 a day and far away from help if climate disaster strikes. Political tensions between neighboring nations such as India and Pakistan could add to difficulties. There are rocky times ahead for that region because many of the disasters and sudden changes will play out across country borders. Conflict among the region's countries could easily flare up, said Eklavya Sharma, the deputy director of ICMOD. Hamish Pritchard, a glaciologist at the British Antarctic Survey and not part of the report, said it is a substantial piece of work that takes due note of the uncertainties resulting from the limited snowfall and ice measurements in the high mountains. He said glaciers currently provide an essential buffering role as their meltwater flows into rivers during the summer, which is when water is in the greatest demand downstream, and periodic droughts have the deadliest impacts on populations. Take the ice away, and those people are exposed to serious water stress, and the consequences of that are local, regional, and potentially global in terms of conflict and migration. Ooh, not good. But we already knew that was happening. We've already seen the reports. We've already seen the warning signs and the saber rattling between countries. That is could erupt over water or food conflicts, probably disguised as conflicts because of other reasons. But all in all, not a good outlook. And on that note, thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.